Hi, I'm Arushi Gupta, a research assistant with the Stanford Reg Lab. I'll be presenting on the privacy bias trade-off, data minimization and racial disparity assessments in U.S. government. This is joint work with Victor Wu, Helen Webley-Brown, Jen King, and Dan Ho. On his first day in office, President Biden signed Executive Order 13985 to advance racial equity. The executive order requires all federal agencies to conduct equity assessments to, quote, assess whether underserved communities and their members face systemic barriers in accessing benefits and opportunities. However, as the EO itself notes, many federal datasets are not disaggregated by race. The lack of demographic data is a product of 50 years of data minimization at a federal level. The government limits data sharing between agencies under the Privacy Act of 1974 and direct data collection under the Paperwork Reduction Act, implementing the idea that agencies should collect and retain only data minimally necessary to achieve their objectives. We call this tension between data minimization and the desire for equity assessments the privacy bias trade-off. While technical literature has engaged with the tension between fairness and privacy, looking, for example, at how differential privacy worsens model accuracy for marginalized subgroups, the impact of data minimization in the federal government is far less recognized. Our paper systematically studies the privacy bias trade-off across federal agencies. First, we conduct in-depth case studies of 10 high-volume agencies and survey the 25 equity action plans submitted as agency responses to the executive order mentioned earlier. Second, we summarize the data collection methods considered across agencies. Third, we discuss the types of barriers to acquiring demographic data. And finally, we conclude by offering policy recommendations. Our review of 25 agencies' equity action plans revealed that 21 recognize that better demographic data is essential to meeting equity goals. For example, HHS says, quote, HHS currently lacks the data and equity assessment capacity to consistently identify and address inequities in health and human services. The USDA builds on the lack of data to add that, quote, where it is collected, there is not always enough knowledge to put the data to use. Similarly, IRS both struggles to collect data and, quote, laws against disclosure prevent IRS from acquiring the information from other government agencies. Beyond the basic recognition that demographic data is needed, we observe which data collection methods each agency considers. Sample surveys refer to surveys of a subset of the claimant population, form collection to the addition of demographic data questions to agencies' existing paperwork, record linkage to cross-agency data sharing, typically with census, imputation to the process of inferring race from name, location, and other collected characteristics, and finally, visual observation, where employees visually determine claimant's race. We found that 15 agencies mentioned some expansion to data collection programs, though these proposals are of varying specificity and seriousness. Here, green signifies a relatively developed proposal. We also see that the most frequent modes of proposed data collection are form collection and record linkage. We distilled 5 types of barriers from these case studies. First, legal restrictions like the Privacy Act explicitly prevent agencies from collecting or sharing demographic data. While exceptions to the ban exist in law, bias assessments don't fit neatly into any of the standard carve-outs. In a survey of 79 officials from different federal agencies, 47 respondents cited statutes prohibiting data collection as a barrier. The most frequently reported barrier by 66 respondents was, quote, regulations and policies that make it difficult to link data. These regulations and policies refer to internal guidelines for data collection and sharing beyond the letter of the law. Given the complicated legal landscape, agencies often struggle to understand what exactly is legal. So even where statutes don't ban data collection or sharing outright, internal policy takes a conservative approach that becomes a cognitive limit to expanding data sharing. Second, we turn to the political risk posed to would-be collectors. That is, when agencies consider expanding data collection requirements for third-party providers like banks, these third parties sometimes react by raising privacy concerns. For example, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau issued guidance in 2018 expanding demographic data collection requirements for mortgage lenders. This guidance included privacy protections, stating that loan-level data should be modified before public release to prevent individual borrower re-identification. But some industry commenters still stated that the CFPB should only release aggregate level data or not release any data to protect borrowers' privacy. The CFPB's report paraphrased industry comments as arguing that, quote, if there's any chance that Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data could be used for criminal purposes, the benefits of disclosure could not outweigh the privacy risks. Next, agencies sometimes worry that directly asking for demographic data will elicit a negative response from the public due to unfamiliarity with existing privacy protections, a lack of awareness of the collective benefits of demographic data collection, or distrust of the data collectors, even if individual privacy is not substantively threatened and collection would be permitted by law. When the justification for data collection under privacy law is murky, agencies are especially likely to behave conservatively to maintain public trust. Agencies that already struggle with non-response are particularly suspicious. For example, SNAP does not want to risk lower enrollment by requiring race and ethnicity, so demographic questions are optional. But voluntarily provided data is not statistically meaningful if non-response is non-random. SNAP and other food security programs used visual observation until 2021 in an attempt to supplement voluntary response. While recent guidance from the Food and Nutrition Service bans visual observation, it does not offer an alternative to bridge gaps left by voluntary response. Finally, we look at the technical limitations of legacy systems, limited provisions for interoperability, lack of technical expertise, and administrative burdens that can make data collection and sharing costly. These limitations exacerbate the existing resource gap. The USDA's Market Facilitation Program is one example of technical limitations. Even though visual assessment was prohibited by departmental regulation, because agency staff could not progress through the data management software used without completing the race and ethnicity field, more than 2/3 of responses, or over 500,000 responses, were based on visual assessment. The VA, on the other hand, has significant data stores, but as UCSF notes, VA data are maintained by several distinct data stewards, leading to a sometimes confusing alphabet soup of data partners. Given sufficient resources, the VA could consolidate its fragmented technical landscape to combine existing data sources and evaluate their programs. And in their Equity Action Plan, the VA suggests just that, proposing the Data for Equity Data Hub. While privacy protections are essential, as our case studies illustrate, the current landscape of data collection leaves us without the information necessary to implement EO 13985 and address racial discrimination in the federal government. We will conclude with an overview of some potential paths forward. First, Congress can enact an explicit exception to the Privacy Act to allow record linkage for the purpose of bias assessment. This exception is similar to existing carve-outs for national security purposes or statistical analysis. Second, agencies can internally separate their enforcement offices from those that conduct equity assessments. Thus, enforcement officials will not receive demographic data, and the agency can allay fears of race-based discrimination to build public trust. Treasury is implementing this tactic already. The Office of Tax Analysis is pursuing bias assessment of tax benefits and does not share the data with the IRS, which actually conducts audits. Third, the federal government can increase investment in technical infrastructure and promote cross-agency initiatives. Programs like the recently instituted National Secure Data Service are a good start. Fourth, Congress can amend the Paperwork Reduction Act to streamline the process of adding demographic data questions to federal forms. At the moment, each agency must undergo a separate notice and comment process. Fifth, to address public concerns, federal data collectors can explain how demographic data will be collected, used, and protected on forms to encourage higher voluntary response rates. While data minimization as a policy is broadly viewed as a success, our analysis highlights real weaknesses. Concerns about the government gaining knowledge of individuals has reduced visibility into the impact of policymaking on subgroups. We hope these suggestions can be a starting point to ensure that we can continue to protect individual privacy while still enabling bias assessments. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them with us. Thank you.